Alright, welcome back. This is going to be Revit Lecture 2. We're going to be covering basic operations with walls. So we're going to be going over placing them, selecting them, some stuff about height, center line, and the offset and constraints. So don't worry about any of that right now. We'll kind of take it one step at a time. And so here I am. I'm in Revit 2020. I have started a new project under the architectural template just so I don't have to worry about any kind of presets or anything else. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I'm on the architecture tab. It's just going to, usually it's going to default to the architecture tab. And you can also hit escape and sometimes it'll jump back there. It's not going to that time, of course. So from the architecture tab, I'm not going to worry about this down arrow for now. I'm just going to click on wall right here. And when I do that, you can see that the whole menu here at the top has changed. So first I get kind of these options right here under the draw menu. We'll go over those in a minute. The next I have the modify place wall options here, and it's going to come in with height, unconnected, 20 feet. Again, we'll get into that in a minute. And then there's the location line. By default, it usually comes in at wall center line, but I was messing around with it a minute ago. And then chain is going to be checked, offset is 0, and radius is unchecked. So with those settings, I'm just going to start drawing a wall here, and you just click in the interface, and I'm going to actually zoom in so I have a more reasonable scale that I'm working with. So I'm going to draw a series of 10 by 10 squares with the line tool, and we'll see how first the location line is going to change that. All right. So if I do, and again, you can type just like you could in AutoCAD. I usually don't type in Revit unless I really need to, but just to show you the option there, I can type 10 foot and get that placed in there. Same thing here, so I'm just going to click around instead of typing it in. And so I can do 10 feet right there. So that was done with the location line set to the wall center line. If I change this to finish face exterior, and then over here I'm going to start drawing another line. And you can see that the place where it's going to put that wall is in a slightly different location. And that's because it's using the finish face exterior to actually place this. And we're actually drawing it, since I'm drawing it that way, I think it's, oh no, that was the finish face exterior. Yeah. So if I switch to finish face interior, again, same spot, you can see that these three kind of squares I'm drawing here, let me zoom in real close. This one's kind of the most obvious. You can see that they're not all the same size. And that's because it's using the way that the walls themselves are set up. So if I click back to go to the walls here, or I can just click on a wall here, the properties menu is going to jump back to showing a basic wall. And if I click on this button called that says edit type, you're going to want to get really used to clicking that. And then right here, this first option says edit for structure. And so this breaks down how this wall is actually physically built. In this case, we're using a generic, so we'll get into the more complex walls after this. And if I hit preview, you can see this is kind of like a cutaway top-down of this wall. And if I go to section, you can see this is kind of like a top or a sideways section cut of this. And over here in the menu, we have the layers. This top side is the exterior side, and then the interior side is down here. So when I use the finish face exterior and finish face interior, so one at a time, when I use the finish face exterior, I was using kind of this thin line here above the core boundary, and when I was using the finish face interior, I was using this bottom area as where I was physically placing that wall. And then when I did the center line, I did the full physical center line of this wall. So that's why it would kind of end up in a different position even though I drew the same 10 by 10 square, is because I was using different faces of the wall to draw. So when you're drawing your walls, keep that in mind, that you are not necessarily always going to be placing it with, or at least double check to make sure that you are placing it with the wall, with the face that you think you are. There are a couple other options in there. They're a little bit harder to explain with the default wall, but there's the core face interior, core face exterior, and core center line. That's really hard to show when I'm just using a default, so we will probably get into that in a further lecture. So don't worry about that too much right now. Now, I'm going to hit escape, kind of clear out all my tools. Again, just like AutoCAD, escape's kind of your magic get out of whatever you were doing key. In Revit, again, you can kind of do the left to right selections like you could in AutoCAD. So if I completely surround something doing a left to right selection like this, I will select it, but I'm not going to get any of these other ones that I touched. Whereas if I do a right to left selection, it's going to grab that whole anything it touches in that stack. Okay. Um, I believe AutoCAD was also backwards like this. So if you hold down, if you select something and then hold down Control, it's going to add it to the selection. And if you hold down Shift, it's going to remove it from the selection. And then if you hold down both, it'll toggle whatever you're clicking on. Okay? So there's a couple different selection methods you can go with there. Now, when I click on a wall for Revit, you can see that it opens up this set of measurements over on the side. Let me actually go to, let me just move this over here. So right here we can see we've got a couple different measurements here, and then we've got these arrows. One of the things you always need to remember in Revit is that the arrows are going to be on the outside of whatever it is that you're working with. That applies more specifically to walls and windows and not necessarily doors. So anytime you're working with the exterior face and you want to make sure that the exterior face of your project is actually on the outside, which is a mistake that I catch a lot of students at, make sure that when you are starting to turn your project in, just click through your exterior walls and make sure that those arrows are in the right spot. If they're not, you can hit spacebar and it will toggle it. Now, because of how this was placed on the finish face exterior, you can see that it actually jumps back and forth based on that finish face of the interior wall. Whereas this one, because it was placed on the finish face of the exterior, is going to jump around that exterior face. So those placement lines that you use initially do matter later on in your project. It's not something you can't deal with. It's just something to watch out for. Now, if I want to adjust the size of this room, we can see again, I did this one. It should be 10 feet on the inside here. And I can modify which measurement I'm using by clicking these little witness lines right here, and it will cycle between the exterior, center, and interior. So if I just jump around, I can see that right here I'm matching up with that. So that's going to mark my inside dimension for this room. Now, let's say that I want to bump this square up to 12 feet. I can either click on this and I can drag this out, and usually you can get it pretty accurately, just like that. What? No, don't worry about it. Okay, so I can just click on it and drag it pretty accurately like that, though sometimes you want a little bit better control over it. So let's step back here, and if I click on this, I can actually click in here, and then just like with a lot of other things, I can click on that box and type 12 feet, and it will adjust this out to 12 feet as well. Now, every time I do this, or not every time, but when I do change around to different views, it's going to make me reset those witness lines. So it's not always going to default to what you might think. You'll have to double check where that measurement is coming from. So again, I'm going to set this to 12 feet. I accomplish the same thing by either clicking and dragging or by manually entering that distance right there. So there are two ways for you to do that. Keep that in mind anytime you're working on something, okay? Now, let's get into an actual 3D view. So I'm going to click on View up here at the top, and then there's a 3D View button right here. And that's actually going to open up Revit in a 3D view. So I'm going to go to Tile View so I can see what I'm working on here. And you can see that I've got those three boxes. Again, I'm using, I guess I should cover this too, middle mouse button, click and drag to move around, zoom in and out with the mouse wheel, and then hold down Shift and the middle mouse button to pan around, okay? So here's those three boxes here, and I'm going to do different things with them now as well. So this first box right here, I'm going to select all four of those walls, and then I'm going to come over to the Properties menu, and in the top constraint, I'm going to set this to up to level 2. And so when I make that change, you can see that here it's just shrunk down to level 2. So let me go to elevations. Let's get the right elevation. No, that one. Okay. So you can see here, let me grab these guys and move them into a better position. So this first box right here, tile, okay. All right. adjust the camera here so I can see. All right, so here's our first box right here. This is the one that I set to the top constraint to be up to level 2. So this one was base constraint level 1, so it starts drawing at level 1, and then it comes up to level 2 and stops there. Okay, so that's what the difference, or that's how a base constraint and a top constraint work. By default, what the boxes came in with was a base constraint of level 1, so it starts drawing this from level 1 up, and then it says unconnected. So it's just going to sit there and do whatever it does, and then when it's unconnected, it needs to have a height. So I can actually change this height to 20. I moved out of the box like I told you guys not to. So, all right, 20, keep bumping that. All right, 25 feet. And if I apply that change, you can see that this top has now moved up higher. All right. Next, I'm going to go to, actually, let's make a level 3 real quick. So I'm going to copy and paste this level up here. And that's our level 3. And again, I'm going to go to plan views, generate a floor plan. Okay. Nope, not there. Okay. So this next third and final box right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the top constraint to level 3, and I'm going to set the base constraint to level 2. All right, so you can see again that that's kind of with the base constraint set to level 2, it's going to start drawing at level 2 and it's going to draw it up to level 3. Okay, so that's how you would work with your base, or with your base constraint and your top constraint. Now, why would you want to use these constraints? So let's say that I go and I adjust my level 2. I've built this really nice building, and then I just realized I didn't leave any space for ducting and plumbing on between the ceiling and the floor joists on my first floor. So what I can do is I can come to level 2 here, and I can bump this up to 12 feet. And when I apply that change, it's going to move this up so that when it does that, this first one with the base, or with the top constraint, is going to move with it, and then this third one with the base constraint of level 2 is also going to move up. All right, so I would highly recommend you use the constraints, because what that's going to do is it's going to allow your model to move dynamically, and in a lot of cases you can fix a lot of problems by assigning these wall constraints correctly the first time rather than having to go back and fix them later. All right, so let me see. Let's go to, let's do offsets. So what we just did was we kind of set these with base and top constraints, but there's a couple other options too. And so if I have the base offset, let me grab, I don't want that one, I want this one. All right, so the base offset is another measurement that we can use to adjust this further. So here we are, right now it's starting at level 1 and going up to level 2. If I set this base offset to 1 foot, and apply that, it's going to start drawing at 1 foot off of level 1. And similarly, if I go to -1 foot, it'll actually draw at a foot below level 1. That same rule applies to the top offset, where I can do it 1 foot above, or I can do it 1 foot below. Now, sometimes you don't know exactly how you want it to go, and so another option that you have is that if you have a wall selected, you'll see these little draggable arrows right here. And they'll actually also appear here in the perspective, or sorry, the 3D view as well. So there are some situations where you might actually want to go in here, click on something, and then drag this up to a snap point that is specifically where you want that section of wall to go. And you can see that now this wall is actually up here, and it's kind of being positioned fairly dynamically by the position that I dragged it to, rather than snapping to something that I typed in. And if I want to, I can just drag it back down here, and it's going to snap to its sibling that was connected to it right there. And then same thing, I can go back in, select this whole chunk, and we can set this back to 0 and 0 and get it centered back in its spot. These rules all pretty much just apply to positioning the walls with those. Now, one of the things you don't see, and kind of one of the changes that I made, is when I move this section right here up to starting at level 2 and ending at level 3, you can see here in my level 1 that it's actually disappeared. And that's because, again, think of how we draw our floor plans. Our floor plans are an imaginary line that's cut through a level here. So if I'm doing my level 1 floor plan, there's an imaginary, can I drag? Yeah, there's an imaginary line right here, and it's kind of summarizing what's in this space that I have selected here. What it's not doing is it's not showing me what's above. And so if I go to my level 1 ceiling plan, you can see that I also don't see it here because the ceiling plan only goes up to that next level. It doesn't go past it to where that actual physical wall that it's kind of floating in the middle of nowhere actually is. So when I go to level 2 here, and oh, this is my level 2. So I'm going to move my level 2 over to this tab so we can see. So here we are now. I can actually now select this level 2. That's going to be that one that's floating out there. And then you can see that right here, this first one that was just the this is the one that's the start at level 1 and go up to level 2. It's actually grayed out. I can't actually even interact with it on this level 2. And so that's one of the settings Revit has where it actually restricts your view and correctly highlights the floor below um, when you are on a floor above. So here I am, I've got this level 2 selected right now, and I can now actually modify it. So if you're ever in a position where you're like, oh, I can't see something, it's disappeared, chances are what happened is you move something to a level higher. One of the most common times where we find a situation where that becomes a problem is when we start applying ceilings. And I found a couple projects where there was like a half dozen ceilings in one room, and it's because someone kept clicking in there and then going, I don't see the ceiling, and kept clicking and clicking and clicking. And so what that does is it just adds more ceilings to your project, but you're not seeing it because it's not part of your floor plan view. All right. So um, one last thing I want to cover is offsets. So when we place those initial walls, we'll go back to the wall tool here. Um, and again, so here's your height. Here's your top constraint. That's what's going to come in, and then you can manually set that top constraint. So we kind of covered that already. We covered the location line. Um, chain is fairly simple. Let me just go over that real quick. So if I have chain selected, it's going to chain while I start placing things. If I don't have chain selected, it's going to draw one section of wall and then I have to click again. So I always recommend drawing with chain on unless for some reason you specifically don't need it. Now, offset. There's a lot of times where you're going to want to use an offset in Revit, and usually it's because you're trying to do something somewhat specific. Um, for example, when you're drawing your roofs, you want your roof offset so that you have eaves from your main structure. So if I'm going to draw, let's say I want something off, well, let's just offset 1 foot from some imaginary line. So now I'm drawing this 10-foot room with the finished face interior. This will actually give me that 12-foot room I was looking for. So if I start drawing this way, you can see that the line that I'm drawing, this little blue dashed line, is not matching up perfectly with where the wall itself is being placed. And then if I click here and start moving, you can see that it actually has that little gap there. It's separated. Usually Revit's pretty good about joining these walls together when we draw like this. So I can draw a 10-foot by 10-foot square in this manner, and when I'm done, I should end up with that same 12-foot by 12-foot room. Okay? So if you are finding yourself in a situation, and you will over the course of this semester, where you do need something to offset, a lot of things do have this option right here to offset the line you're drawing. Finally, last couple things is just these extra drawing tools up here. So by default, we're starting with the line tool. I can click on rectangle and it's just going to draw a rectangle. I don't usually like drawing like that because the rectangle doesn't necessarily come in with good numbers the way that kind of like drawing it manually does, where you get these nice round numbers and then can adjust a little bit from there. Now, if you start dragging this, it will figure itself out and get to a nice snapped, decent number that you can work with. Next, let's go back there. We have inscribe polygon. So this is going to be just like drawing in, SketchUp, where you're going to have the number of sides you can set. You're going to choose the finish face, and then inscribed is going to go from. You can see that It's going to be the distance between the center and then it should be that inside face right there. So you can see how that is right. Let me click out a little bit here. Okay, so it's that inside corner. It's this corner right here. Whereas if I go to the other option, which is the circumscribed polygon, it's going to do it to the center of this wall. And so you are, if I do 4 foot and 4 foot, you can see that this one, after I rotate this, um, if I rotate this one, let's see, what is it, 60 degrees? Nope, it's going to be 30 degrees because that's how numbers work. 30, there we go. So, of course, uh, oh, I guess, yeah, okay. So, here's that polygon compared to the other one. So it's noticeably smaller. So keep those distances in mind when you are setting up polygons with your walls. Once you have a wall placed, you can actually go in and delete a chunk of wall. And then I'll cover it real quickly here, but we'll get into it a little bit more later as well, is actually being able to edit the profiles of walls. So if I go in here and I select, I'm going to come to, yeah, we'll stick with 3D view. So I've got this section of wall right here, and I can click on edit profile, and it's going to give me this like kind of pink area here, and I can click on this navigation little widget right here in the 3D view to kind of snap me to a particular view. And then it's going to give me these draw tools here, and we're going to get fully into kind of editing profiles when we get into walls and floors and stuff. But for now, just realize that this menu is here and you can edit profiles. So what I can do is I can actually do this is, and put these squares here, and when I click this green check mark, it's actually going to draw this wall with these holes in it. So you can see that um, there's actually like lines showing through in that space. This is not how you place windows or doors, so don't use this for placing windows and doors. Again, that's something we'll get into later. This is just for being able to kind of do cool editing tricks with the walls. So if you wanted to, for example, have a cool drop down in the middle of your wall, I figured out a couple cool ways to do some stuff with windows that I will try and show you guys later, and then we can split this, right, and delete that. And so now I have this kind of cool wall shape that I couldn't get otherwise just by drawing like kind of normal walls, all right? So that's the basic bit of walls, and right now we're just using generic walls. So next lecture, what we're going to get into is actually editing walls and the different types and things that make them up. So that's all for this one. I will see you in the next one.